3 seconds.
Sanj Sandhu is a UK doctorate student and twice published author who has worked in professional sport, international education, and the corporate world for over 5 years. He is driven by human flourishing and focused on the science of well-being and positive psychology. Prior to his second professional innings, he worked in consultancy for Accenture in London and Deloitte in Dubai after graduating in accounting and financial management. He recently achieved his dream of becoming the well-being coach for the Gulf Giants, the winners of the inaugural ILT20 Cricket League in the UAE. Sanj, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, boys. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Great to see you both. And yeah, very happy to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, we're going to talk about positivity today, Sanj. So I want to kick off maybe by asking you a little bit more about your successes in the UAE with Gulf Giants. I know you're a huge cricket fan. Tell us what that meant to you.
Yeah, I guess that's a perfect example of positivity. I guess to start with, I guess positivity for me is the way you frame something. So I feel like there's lots of things that happen in our life, whether it's big things or small things, and I think positivity is one of those choices that we can use to frame a certain situation. So that how I frame those 5 weeks of my life at the start of January 2023 was exceptional, and I I could speak for the whole hour about that, to be honest, boys. But it was I think it was a dream come true because um I've always loved cricket. I grew up waking up early in the morning watching cricket um in India overseas, or watching the test matches on Channel 4, or playing cricket to a high junior level, and um being obsessed with the sport, traveling to Australia to watch it, traveling to the West Indies. Like all of our holidays when we were small were based around cricket. So cricket is the biggest part of my life. And then, um, you have your aspirations to become a professional sports person. And for me as a professional cricketer, and for many reasons that didn't happen. And then now for me then to work within professional sports or a cricket team is it's got to be the next best thing, really. You get the kit, you go to the stadiums, you're spending time with the athletes, you go into the net, you're doing a few catches, you're throwing the ball, you're making all the same jokes you would normally, and everybody gets the kind of sense of humor. And, it's just, and I think given the link between well-being, which I focused on in the last few years, it was incredible for me to spend time with people who are at the top of their game. Whether that was physically, but also how they prime themselves to perform at that level with that crowd and that expectation and those salaries is fascinating for me. So I felt like I came full circle in some sort of way, and I'm excited to see where it goes. So that was an incredibly positive experience in my life. Thank you for asking to start.
I'm glad it was. And well-being coaching aside, I could only imagine the anxiety you had when a ball first came to you in that training session, and everybody was watching, and they wondered, will he catch it? Will he drop? I
had to wear gloves, boys, because again, these. So again, simple things like I've not played cricket for about 10 years. So I in my head I think I can do a lot of the things that they do. But the level again, the way they throw a ball, like for example, we throw balls, or I throw a ball, and I back myself as a good thrower. But when you're standing there with a mitt and there's a player again who's a professional sports person who's paid a lot of money to throw that ball accurately. So if you're holding the mitt at your shoulder, they will hit your shoulder, and the thud that has. I had to wear gloves inside the mitt because I was that scared. It was a bit of a frightening experience, but yeah, it was funny for me to do those kinds of things. And I think from a rapport point of view as well, again, a little bit geeky about it, but I think that helped me to build a bit of rapport with the boys as well, because you're not just again, well-being within sport or psychology within sport is often very clinical, it's often very hard, it's often very rigid. But to have that kind of way or avenue where I could build rapport with the boys through catching and throwing a ball or giving throwdowns, I think makes a big difference. So but yeah, it was it was fun. The first time I didn't wear a glove in the mitt and my hand was hurting for like 2 days. So you learn the hard way.
So what was your role with the Gulf Giants, Sanj? What was it that you were doing?
It was I was really fortunate to work in an incredible team. So like, shout out to Andy Flower, who's like the super coach of the cricket world, and he's an absolute legend. And I'm grateful that he believed in me and believes in me to ultimately be me, I think, within that context, because it was a new experience for him to work with somebody in that capacity. And again, I think the context is a lot of the stigma around that kind of function or that kind of role within sport is huge. So we approached it with a less is more philosophy, where you're not necessarily going up to boys and asking them questions about life or constructs of positive psychology or what well-being means to them. It's been a lot more organic, been a lot more me. And I think, my role in that first few days was just get to know people as well as possible in a very organic way, which I believe I'm quite good at in terms of asking about themselves, asking about their family, learning more about their journey and building a bit of rapport with them. So then as the tournament progressed, I was able to do a bit more of the well-being stuff. So it was simple things like asking the boys, doing one-to-ones with the boys, asking what do they need to perform at their best, what's their pre-match routines, understanding more about how they prefer to receive information, whether it's about team meetings or things like that. What can we avoid as a coaching group to not trigger them? What can the management team do in terms of informing them about social media commitments? So just trying to understand more about what they need, cricket related and non-cricket related, to perform at their best. And then I would share that information with those responsible for those different functions. So that was, I guess, one part of it. And then the second part of it as the tournament progressed was, just doing check-ins with some of the players, whether that, again, and these are all completely informal, they're not formally said, boys, let's go and have a check-in, and all that kind of stuff. It's catching up with people, it's seeing people at breakfast. It's, again, it's just being a mate. It's just being me. Like, it was literally like incredible that I was given permission to be me and provide my insights based on what I felt and saw and heard. And again, how much. And then towards the end of the tournament, I facilitated feedback at the end of the tournament in terms of what went well, what would make it even better for next year. But I think weaved in between all of that in terms of traveling to practice, being at the stadium, we stayed in the same hotel together for 5 weeks. That's a serious and immersive experience. So you have a lot of time with these people, and you get to see, you get to meet some of their families, you get to socialize with some of them as well, and it's just like, it was ultimately, I believe you can either help an environment or hinder an environment. And my job, I guess, is more important, given the function, was to help that environment. So whether that's through the way that I conduct myself, whether that's through insights or stories that I share with them, whether it's the insights or stories I share with the coaches so that they can facilitate feedback or training better for a certain person. It was just, back home you say, just be a good egg. Because it was a new experience. A lot of those players had not worked with somebody in that function before. And if they have, often they're very apprehensive of these people. Oh, here we go. What does he want to know? Okay, what are you going to fix me? All this kind of like, traditional negative psychology stuff. And the same for the coaches, because, these are elite athletes who are getting paid serious amounts of cash, and they could say, well, what do you know? Which is true in that respect. I'm not a professional sports person. I don't know what it's like to earn that much or to be susceptible to social media abuse and all of these. I don't know what that's like. So my job is to find out more about themselves, and use the lens of perspective to help them understand or coach themselves to be better. So I'm not necessarily going in with an intervention unless it's absolutely essential. Some of the boys asked about visualization, some of them asked about breathing techniques, some of them asked about, focusing. So we did things like gratitude or setting goals. But I'd say broadly it was being a good influence around the group, being myself, and if and when I felt like there was something to say or to share, I had the autonomy to do that.
Thanks for sharing that, Sanj. And what I see there, it does sound amazing. It's like a dream job. And you're clearly really passionate about that. And coming back to choice, contrast that with, let's use that cricket expression, with your first innings as in accounting and in the corporate world, to something you're now just describing as you're really passionate about, you love your cricket, and you're doing something that you want to do. How important is that, Sanj?
I think sometimes you can see a smile, but sometimes you can hear a smile too. I think the way that people say things, but I think it's the most important thing in the world, because ultimately, so the question was, sorry, how important is it to do something that you love? I think if you're in a position where you can do something you love, you're flying the flag for many other people, including the version of yourself who wanted to do that, first of all. Second of all, I think there's a lot of people who could do something that they love. However, because of the certain habits or lifestyle choices they have, being able to um, be resourceful and give yourself the opportunity to do something you love is a challenge. And there's some people in the world who almost have no chance of doing what they love. So I think there's different versions of that. So I think if you're fortunate enough to do something you love, and you respect that journey and process where you've got to doing something that you love, I think it's the most fulfilling experience of life, because what more, like, for example, and I can only share my experience, but again, I got to spend time with incredible human beings for 5 weeks in an incredibly immersive experience. My partner got to come from India and stay with us for a few days. We got to celebrate her birthday for the first time ever together in that cricket environment, where she got to meet all the coaches, all the players. After one of the games, she came on the pitch, and we had a photo together, and, things like that on the pitch. And you're like, it's just like, these are so heartwarming experiences that you can only dream of. And then my parents were watching the games at home as well. So, for me, it was all of these different parts of my life that mean so much. We're all intertwined with each other. And yes, that's beautiful. At the same time, it could be a massive risk, because you're putting all of your eggs in that basket. And I think that's something that needs to be caveated with doing something that you love, is that the highs are the best in the world, but the lows also impact those around you, because they're the ones that you're spending all that time with. Um, but I think from a fulfillment perspective, it's incredibly important um, to do something you love, or, because I think there's a lot of pressure on people as a job to do something they love, is find things that they love in every single day. So there's a lot of people who would love to be an entrepreneur, but they're not willing to put in the effort or sacrifice certain things to get to that level of being an entrepreneur. However, they can find 15 or 3 or whatever that number is of things that they love to do every single day. And if their job gives them that ability to switch off at 4 p.m. or not switch on until 10 a.m. or whatever that might be, that balance or X amount of summer holidays, and if they genuinely love that, I think that should be encouraged more as well, because I think it's very cool, it's very fashionable, it's very trendy to be an entrepreneur. However, for different people, it suits them differently. And also, just one more thing is that different people at different stages of their life might do things differently as well. So I can afford to do this because I'm 29. I'm not married. I don't have children. I don't have a mortgage. A lot of these things I don't have, and therefore I need to just be able to afford to pay for myself and the life that I want to live. However, in 5 or 10 years' time, when hopefully I am married, hopefully I am with children, hopefully I do own a property, then, the ability for me to just fund myself or to be responsible or accountable to myself will be different. So I think it's different for different people, but for me at this phase of my life, it's an absolute blessing.
It sounds incredible what you've done, and the place that you're in. You sound incredibly positive yourself, which is probably a good thing as we're talking about positivity. And I'm sure you'll have your own sort of views on that. And when people are positive, the whole narrative of what you've talked about there, about people being different, about working with elite sports people, doing the things that you love. When people are positive and other people are viewing those positive people, it sounds really easy, doesn't it? There's a sort of sometimes an air of, well, it's really easy. You just do the stuff you love. You mentioned about people doing things differently, and I'd be really interested to maybe ask that question around the positivity of these elite athletes that you're working with. We might be able to make an assumption, which isn't too wild, that these people that are elite athletes playing cricket in the UAE, like you say, for good money, they're pursuing their dreams. They're doing something that they love. I would imagine a large majority of them are, at least. What did you notice about their levels of positivity and about how they did things differently and the stories that they told themselves?
The more I've thought about this over the last few weeks, so again, I pride myself on doing little things and trying to be as present as possible. So, like, it's been 3 weeks since the end of that tournament, and I've reflected so much about it. So I've wrote a list of all the things that happened. How were team meetings run? What was the pre-match routine? What was the during match routine? Post-match routine? Breakfast? Like, I've gone like nuts and all of that. So I think the thing that impressed me the most about how these elite athletes approached the way approach their role is by simply being professional. And again, I think there was a big difference between the more experienced players who have played in the IPL, who've won World Cups with England, or played in the Big Bash and played in the 100 and a lot of other tournaments, compared to those who have had a lesser experience. Again, because so for example, some of the boys who've had a lot of experience, they're World Cup winners, they're world-class performers, getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for those few weeks of cricket. They are incredible, or they were incredible, and I was completely surprised by, I'd say, the 4 or 5 most professional people in that team, in my opinion, were some of the most experienced players who were looking at this tournament in a completely different way to other people. So I think their perspective of that tournament was, this is a huge opportunity. This is the first time this tournament is happening. This tournament has signed a 10-year deal. If I perform well here and I do my best and I'm a good, fantastic professional, I could get another contract for next year. And that could mean X for my life, my career, but also from a fulfillment perspective of playing with an incredibly high standard. So whether it would be simple things like, you get to see what these boys are eating at breakfast. Because you've always, as a fan, you always wonder, okay, what on earth do people eat? Like, what do they eat? Do they count how many nuts they eat or not? And some people are different, and some people do, some people don't. And again, it was very different. So whether it was a breakfast, about the way they, we were in a 5-star hotel, so the buffet, how much do they indulge or not indulge? And again, these were the kinds of stories. So my job as well-being coach then, just to move away from the direct question, sorry, is some of those boys who were less experienced and were more susceptible to the indulgence of being in a 5-star hotel for 5 weeks at breakfast time. It was encouraged that they would then see what other players were doing at breakfast time as well. So in the same situation, how differently were people behaving? So you have the young UAE players who are thinking, well, I live in Dubai and I get to spend 5 weeks in the hotel. Sweet. Pancakes, waffles, cheese, all the different types of cereals, full fat milk, whatever you want. So it's like, and again, of course, you have to enjoy yourself. But again, you see the people at this end of the spectrum and you see where they are. And it's like, well, if these people aren't doing that, why am I doing that? Within reason. So I think seeing how people ate or consumed or saw nutrition was fascinating for me. Training was fascinating with me because we had a brilliant group. The 7 other coaches there were absolute legends as well, and the players were great. So we had a very clear system where players could, at the start of the tournament, obviously practice was for everybody, but as the tournament progressed, it was more optional. So again, we had an early bus, we had a bus that was leaving training early as well. So boys would come and get done what they need to do, and it was their role. It was almost role reversely. Look at it from a school perspective in terms of what you boys do as well. It's like, it's almost you let them decide what they're doing. When do what do you want to do when you go? Don't just come to training for the sake of training. What are you going to do when you come here? Because your time's precious. We're traveling X, Y, Z and all that kind of stuff. So how they practice was very intentional. And I guess from a well-being point of view as well, is that I think the range of emotions they experience, I would say, is more condensed and more they're more emotionally aware than others because of that experience. So again, you win a game. Again, the young experience, they're like, yes, this is like the best thing ever. High fives, hugs, all of these beautiful things, and taking photos and all these again, really special things. But the more experienced boys, they're like, okay, well, this is just one of one. This is just 2 of 2. We've got a long way to go yet, boys. So it was just the way they conducted themselves in almost every aspect of knowing what they needed to do, and also what they needed almost to portray or show or share to the other players to say, right, boys, we've won 3 games on the bounce. Great. But we've not come here to win 3 games on the bounce. We've come here to win the effing tournament. So can't calm down a bit, or we're not going to have a beer tonight because we won. We'll have a beer once we win the final. That kind of mentality. So it was fascinating.
There's a huge conversation to have there around positivity, isn't there? And just to maybe pick out a few of your examples, food's a huge thing that people look forward to. And like you say, you've got some excited younger players that suddenly can eat pretty much what they want because they're in a hotel. the narrative that's going on in their heads and the context is very different to the experienced players who you say, well, maybe have access to this kind of sort of luxury a lot more often. You've also got the stories that players are telling themselves in their head about the opportunities. You've got those that can see the long-term gains of doing well in one season because of the 10-year deal ahead. And you've got those that are just thinking, I hope I get on the pitch. And then you've got another narrative within that about, that mentality of that positivity around winning. When do you let yourself relax and enjoy the moment and appreciate the win? How long does that last before it's right? It's game time again, we go again. How do you manage that with such a huge range of players, from those that are experienced and tell themselves such different stories to those that are a little bit more inexperienced, and for whom maybe that positivity or that happiness comes almost a little bit quicker and a little bit too quickly in some cases?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that, because again, for me, I'm learning as well, because I'm a fan as well, So yes, this was an incredible opportunity, but also I'm a fan. So again, when that TV camera is in your face, or you're on TV, you see all these pros and they've got their their TV face, but you can't. How can you not? You're on TV. Your parents are watching. You're trying not to smile. So like again and again, these younger players are in that situation. Their parents are there. They're enjoying themselves. And I think for the senior players or the more experienced players, they manage themselves. And my advice for the younger players is to spend time with those senior players. And again, it's not wishing away those moments. And I think you've got to be careful, again, whether it's in school, whether it's in sport, whether it's in the work, in the corporate world, those special experiences are only special the first few times. You can get incredibly numb to these beautiful experiences, whether it's handing your phone, because you're not allowed your phones because of corruption, or whether it's, the hugs, or, the beer after you win a game, or all these kinds of things. You can get very numb to those brilliant experiences very quickly. So I think you've got to appreciate them, but the senior players manage themselves and they see a different kind of vision for what this means to them. And the younger players, then it's right, enjoy it in a healthy way. That's where the well-being comes to it. Healthily enjoy these things, but also if you want to get to that level, notice the behaviors of what these guys do themselves. And that's not me saying, setting homework or something like that. These guys are, elite athletes. They just need to notice. Okay, well, when we win the next game, notice how Chris Jordan conducts himself. What's he doing? How's he behaving? These kinds of things. So and again, when you have time with players, so we were there for 5 weeks, you have the time to be more subtle and to have these conversations, as opposed to if it was a 10-day tournament, you'd almost have to work a little bit faster. So I'd say the senior players manage themselves, and the junior players almost just like spend time with those fantastic role models. Again, coming back to teaching, it's a lot about role models. So look at what those role models do and spend time with those role models. Ask them as many questions as you have, because after these 5 weeks, you're not going to have access to these people potentially for another 12 months.
Damien Hughes calls them cultural architects, doesn't he?
Cultural architects.
The people in a team that aren't the leadership of the team. It isn't the manager, the coach's job to do that. It's the people who sort of manage the dressing room, manage the culture within the team. And like you mentioned there, you've got experienced players that have played at the top level. And if you're a budding young up and comer, you're going to be looking at them and thinking, well, why am I eating waffles? He's having a 3-egg omelette. Why am I getting up at this time to go training late if he's getting up to go early? And just through almost osmosis, you start to change your habits based on. I just wonder. Go on, yeah.
And that was fascinating for me, just because punctuality. A small thing like punctuality. Like if the bus was leaving at 1:45, everybody was on the bus before 1:40. So if you've got, again, these elite athletes on the bus, again, you've got these UAE boys who've grown up in traditional Indian families. 1:45 it's not 1:45, is it? It's get on the bus at 1:45. And I'm allowed to say this, of course, but it's not 1:45. It's not 1:45. It's probably 1:45, and some of the other big players get there about 2, and then it'll be fine. Things like that. So it's like if these guys are doing the basics right, what's your reason not to? You can't not. So again, that kind of cultural architect point of view, if those big players are sitting on the front few seats of the bus, and then you're late and you're a younger player and you're walking on, you like, oh my God, like you just make me cringe. So like these kinds of things like punctuality, diet, and attention to detail were exceptional to experience.
That was, it reminds me of a story of Clive Woodward, who during the England World Cup winning team, he got the group together and they looked at the non-negotiables, and they called being punctual was being actually 5 minutes early, as you've just said, and they actually named for it. They called it Lombardi time, and all the players came up with that, and that was their big non-negotiable, was doing that. And I saw a video recently, Sanj, on, it was Casemiro after the Man United won the Carling at the League Cup last weekend. He said brilliant. He was having a go at some of his players, holding them to account after the final whistle had gone. He was still expecting standards about, I think it was Bruno Fernandes had not passed a player. And then I saw another video yesterday, and it was phenomenal. They're coming down the steps after getting the trophy, and there was a young man who was wanting a hug off them and a high five as they're coming down the steps. The first 4 players just acknowledged him, but didn't really acknowledge this young man who was waiting for a hug. Casemiro comes down, gives this little lad massive hug, like proper like into it, and then the next, I think 5 or 6 players after that copied.
Wow.
And that's the influence of what is incredible character, how he's changed the dynamics in that particular changing room. That's a proper cultural architect. My question to you, Sanj, is what if you'd have been losing your team? How would your role have changed, and what would you have done to sort of try and flip that narrative?
Yeah, again, fascinating question. And when we did lose a couple of games, we lost one game in the group stage, and we lost a big qualifier game, which would have given us an extra 4 days of rest before that final. And my job in that kind of period, again, is listening to those cultural architects and understanding, okay, they've been in these situations before. So it's again, the more senior players managing themselves, managing the environment, say, right, boys, we will lose. We're playing sport, we will lose, but understanding why we lost this game will help us better for next time. And almost allowing them to lead that kind of environment, because a lot of these things, like whether it's about punctuality or about, what you said about Casemiro is incredible. It's about showing people, not necessarily telling people, because again, these athletes, their radar for almost BS is really like switched on. Like they know if somebody's just making up words or saying words for the sake of words. So what I learned, I think, was not matters just what people say, who says it and how they say it, and in what kind of context they say it. So you have your role where you lose a game. So this is what happened, boys. We weren't good enough today. What are we going to do differently when we play these guys again in a few days' time? And be as simple, as honest as that. Not throw things, not bash things. Okay, that might happen in sport. That's okay. But ultimately, using those feelings to then drive forward actions. So it's creating awareness. And again, my role then was with the younger players. Say, right, you're frustrated because you think awfully, but how much are you going to dwell on that? Because again, when this is on TV, when the stakes are higher for these lesser experienced players, I noticed some of them were really harsh on themselves, naturally so. But again, at what point does that become detrimental to the other people they're spending time with? And again, you'll know this in the classroom or the staff room as well. It's like, if somebody's had a bad day or a bad moment, okay, great. Not okay, great. Okay, let's accept that and let's acknowledge that and be compassionate with them. But if they start to necessarily not milk it, but kind of perpetuate that, oh, I did this, or oh, I did that, oh my God, I'm so bad. Oh, it's like, well, shut up, in the politest way possible, because you're now starting to ripple that negativity. And again, from a positive psychology point of view, the ripple effect is real. So that person then rippling potential negative vibes, negative energy, negative statements that are just absolutely not needed. So again, you have to work with that person, say, right, express yourself, say whatever you want to say, do it once, get it out there. And anytime you want to have a little moan, come to me, but also just think about what impact are you having on others? And I think that's the important thing when you lose and when you have those difficult moments in games as well. There's like, okay, what's your impact on the situation? So again, for me, it was incredible to learn about how people may feel something, but how they behave is slightly different. Again, as a head coach, as a captain, you might think, oh God, I can't believe that's just happened. I just gave that guy, I trusted that guy to bat in that position or to bowl in this position, and they've completely let me down. But they might think that, but they can't behave like that. And if a bowler's just bowled a pour over, a batter's got out, you can't go and blast them right there, because what impact does that have, one, on the others in terms of, okay, well, maybe the coach is going to do that to me, or captain's going to do it to me if I don't perform well. But also those people, when you play a team sport, again, they have a role. So a bowler's bowled a bad over. If you say, Sanj, mate, that was absolutely awful, you're not going to bowl for the rest of the game. Sanj might still have to make a run out or a catch, or bat in the second innings. So it's like the way that these people conduct themselves in those challenging moments, again, for me, was fascinating, because until the game was done, it was almost like none of these things came out. But afterwards, over a drink or while you're having dinner together or on the bus, that's when you're going to have these conversations. So I learned a lot about communication, not necessarily what to say or how to say, but also when to say it. And I think my biggest learning from that, from a personal point of view and a professional point of view going forward, is sometimes in that moment, it's probably not the best thing to say.
Yeah.
But if you wait an hour or a day, or wait till the next day, how would that conversation have gone?
And it sounds like what you got really good at was being in a position where people could talk to you. So you were around and you were just waiting. Am I on the right lines? It sounds very much like you were always about so people could connect with you if you wanted to. And I wonder whether you could tell us a little bit about maybe a player or two, without mentioning any names, of course, that maybe struggled with positivity and that you did have to spend a little bit more time with. How did you intentionally do that? What were the tactics that you used to try and increase that level of positivity with them?
It's interesting because the philosophy was less is more. Now, I have different models of ways I can work, so there's like a level 1, level 2, level 3, basically I call it, 0% to 100% full Sanj. I would have in my dream world things differently, but I understand where I am in that point and I understand my role. So my role in that position was, as much as I might wanted to have done certain things, my role in that situation, which, and it worked really well, and I respect that fully, was, and again, because you have the context of the stigma attached to this subject within those environments is rife. So the last thing anybody wants is when things are going tough, oh, the psychologist or the psych or the life person's coming up to me, oh God, here we go, what's he gonna say? Oh God, get the phone out, start walking in a different direction. Because again, you know what it feels like. It's like in class when the teachers, oh, here they come again. What are they gonna say to me now? They're gonna make me look silly, or all these kinds of things. They just want to look cool in front of their other teacher friend, or whatever kind of things someone say. Is for me, it was really important. Just again, through building an organic relationship, you say things like, right, let's have a little catch up tomorrow, or rest well and we'll go for a walk tomorrow. Again, you don't have to do it in the public setting or in the changing room when somebody's bowled rubbish and they're annoyed at themselves, and even though we won, they're frustrated with themselves. You don't have that intervention moment now, or I didn't. It was right, we'll catch up tomorrow, mate. Or something like that, where you allow people that time to process it, and you catch up differently. So I think for different people it was differently, and my opportunity was to understand as much about those people as possible so that I could imagine and empathize with them and think, okay, when do they need me? Does somebody need me right now? Or do they need me tomorrow morning? So for me, it was all about, trying to understand, how does somebody learn? How receptive are they to feedback and all these kinds of things? And then asking a second or third or fourth opinion. It wasn't just me. These coaches that I worked with were some of the best coaches in the world. So it was me asking a lot of questions to other people, and it might not be me facilitating that, but it might be somebody else facilitating that too.
A lot of this, Sanj, comes back to the power of choice and the choice to be positive. And one of my favorite books, and I know Lewis has read it, and it's very popular in the positivity world, is The Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. An absolutely phenomenal book of a Holocaust survivor who chose to reframe that situation in a positive aspect, and he cared for others and had a purpose, and that got him through that really difficult situation. And very similar with Edith Egar, who talks about a similar situation in the Holocaust camps. Tell us a bit about that choice of then you changed careers. Why? What was that real drive there? What was the real seminal moment that made you think this is not for me? Because that's that's a big choice. You've studied at uni for such a long time and then you make a diversion.
Yeah, that was a fascinating. Looking back, it becomes more interesting because I'm trying to understand more about how I was in that situation. I think it was a very emotional decision looking back. Because I was 24. I had everything going for me. Studied at uni, got my 2-1, tax-free salary, living in Dubai, literally working with some of the brightest minds in the world, wearing a suit every day. Working in DIFC. It was like as cool as it could get for me. Um, and I guess there were loads of moments within that, but I think for me, what drove me was I started to read a lot more books about life and purpose and positive psychology and well-being, and speaking with people who were more experienced than me, or looking at people who were really satisfied with life, or what I thought they were satisfied, and trying to understand, okay, what did they do differently? And I think the moment that it hit me was on my 24th birthday, so October 2017. Living the life in Dubai. I think it was a Friday, when the weekends were Friday, Saturday back then in Dubai, and I was in the swimming pool, literally living the dream. And I just thought to myself, I've peaked. And I thought, I've peaked. I was like, how on earth have I peaked already? I'm 24.
Yeah,
I've just
24.
peaked. Yeah, I was like, I'm 24. I've just peaked. Like, I was like, I've got this amazing job in this brilliant company, and unless something disastrous happens, I will have a brilliant salary and all these kinds of things for the rest of my life. So I'm literally sorted. I was like, this is great. And then the other part of me was like, all right, but so what? You know, so what? What are you going to do with that kind of cash? You don't splurge on stuff now. What are you gonna do with, instead of £30,000, what would it be with £50,000? And then I got started going deeper and a bit of a rant to myself and saying, right, well, you don't like wine. Are you going to start buying £30 bottles of wine instead of £10 bottles of wine? Or like, are you going to buy a £200 belt instead of a £10 belt? Or like, are you going to get a suit from Hugo Boss instead of a suit from Marks and Spencer? Like, where does it stop? Or like saving for a business class flight or going to the Maldives or whatever it is. So like, I started to become quite harsh on myself about what was the point in all of this. You know,
You're searching
I
for
was saving
meaning,
money.
Sanj.
Yes, it's exactly that, searching for meaning. So it was for me trying to understand, okay, I've peaked. So who peaks at 24? Professional athletes or YouTubers? Apart from that, nobody. Yeah. And again, I'd read the Ferguson book and all these kinds of things. And, a lot of these people, and that's when, Barack Obama was quite big as well. And these people don't peak till they're like 50 or 60 or 70. So I'm like, either I'm the absolute exception or I'm doing something wrong. And so then I decided that I would strive for me to peak. And peaking for me was where I was extremely proud of myself and felt like I was working towards something. And at that moment in time, I felt like that environment for me, and again, it was just one environment. Other environments would have been different, but that environment for me wasn't necessarily me at my best. So what could I do to explore what the best version of me is? Um, and for me, that was self-employment. It wasn't getting a job at Google or applying for a job at Facebook and these kinds of things.
And it sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it,
I
Sanj?
know.
Because you're 24, you're sat in a pool in Dubai, you've got a tax-free salary, you've got the money you need, you've got everything that most people would want in terms of security and in terms of financial freedom. Yet there was no positivity there. It sounded a little bit like you had a midlife crisis at 24 and you were really questioning what your purpose was and what you were doing moving forward. Can you put a finger on what you wanted your purpose to be and what was missing?
Um, that's a great question. Could I put a purpose on it? I couldn't. So for the next 9 months from that moment until I left Deloitte, which was on the 5th of July 2018, I did not go out once for those 9 months or whatever time. I did not go out once. Every weekend, I went to the Deloitte office in DIFC with my Kindle, with my laptop, and just sat in there by myself for hours and hours every weekend. And I would read books and I would reflect about what I want in my life. I made a list of all the people I admire in the world and what do I admire about them. I was trying to recreate my perfect self or my best self. And I was just really immersing myself in what it is. And I don't really know what it was that drove me, but it was ultimately the more you read about life, um, and again, I remember reading a quote that said, do things before you get as many responsibilities. So again, I was 24, I didn't have certain responsibilities. So I felt like I could explore. I'd saved cash again during that months by not buying stupidly expensive alcohol in Dubai or trying to save for a new suit or a business class flight. So I'd saved cash And then I said to myself, right, I'm going to go and explore. And if this cash goes to zero, I'll go back and get another finance job because I've got a great degree, I've got brilliant experience. And if it starts to go back up, exploring something that I love, then I'm just going to continue that. And for me, stumbling upon um it was again, I wanted to be the best version of myself. What was the best version of myself? I'm at my best when I'm with people. Yeah, I love people. A lot of people say that they love people. Okay, great. What do I love about people? I love stories. I love communicating. And yes, I speak a lot, but I promise you, I love listening way more. So I love to listen to other people's stories about their journeys and all these things. All right. So communication is interesting for me. Okay, who could you communicate with? What could you communicate about? So I started off this new second innings in terms of delivering workshops to universities in Dubai about corporate life, the difference between London versus Dubai. That was my workshop, or setting goals, because I was like, all right, I've got, what experience have I got? And then who on earth is going to listen to me? I was 24, I didn't have a beard then. And I was like, who's going to listen to me talk about positive psychology or happiness or habits? Nobody. So I'll start with those who were interested in what I've done. And at that point in time, it was studying in Britain, working in London for a fancy company, working in Dubai for a fancy company, and what are the differences. So for me, it was understanding um, what do I wake up in the morning? And again, there was one moment actually. Sorry, this is quite a long answer, but I always remember in February 2018, I did my first ever workshop. It was a free workshop for the University of Wollongong in Dubai, and it was on goal setting. And it was a 3-hour workshop, and it was the first workshop that I'd ever do in my life. And the day before, so that was on a Saturday morning when the weekends were different. On the day before, on the Friday, I spent the whole day in the coffee shop in JLT making my PowerPoint and doing notes. And that 10 hours were some of the best 10 hours of my life. It was like bliss. I was like, what is this world? I was like, I sit at work for 5 days a week. I hate my laptop. I hate emails. I hate staring at a screen. It drives me insane. I hate listening to, what other people have to say about certain things. And I wasn't necessarily depressed or anything like that. I was just a bit frustrated. And I was like, I've just spent 10 hours and I've loved looking at my screen. I've loved learning new information and I've loved exploring different possibilities. What has just happened? And for me, that was a moment where, because I always thought that people who enjoy their lives are either, again, people with lots of money or who've already had lots of money. I didn't think happy people could be a lay person on the street who just enjoys their life. I didn't think that was possible.
Mm.
So then I was like, this is like, oh my God, this is like, what is this? And at that moment, I was like, this is something that really stimulates me and excites me. And that's when I knew I had to explore what this feeling was.
And you've got to have a lot of courage to do what you did. And I'll put that in context. At 24, you've got a life that could set you up for the rest of your life, and probably a life. And I'm making a few assumptions here that, from your childhood and from growing up was what you wanted to move towards and what everybody valued and what everybody said is brilliant. You've got responsibility, you've got a great position, you've got great money. This is what you should be having. So at 24, to have the courage to recognize that actually that wasn't right for you, I think is enormous, absolutely enormous. And also the courage to be able to say, well, I'm going to leave all that behind and take a risk and to do something different. Where did that courage come from? You've done the work, you've clearly spent time reflecting, but where did that courage come from? Where did you pull it from?
A lot of it was again seeing the people that I spent my time with, like again my parents. So I remember reading a book during this time called Principles by Ray Dalio. Again, another big book in terms of the meaning and life space. And one of the things that Ray Dalio talked about, one of the principles that stood out for me was talking with believable people. So my parents, who are incredible human beings, at that point in my life, if I was to ask them, and I did ask them, and I learned that they were not believable in that regard, about life advice about being an entrepreneur or exploring financial uncertainty, they were so against it. They hated the thought of it because, again, they've worked their ass off. They've worked incredibly hard for, for me to go to university, for me to want to, and I've got, they've taken me on holiday to Dubai. I'm literally living the perfect life, and they were the happiest parents in the world. That Sanj had a job at Deloitte in Dubai. They were they loved it. They loved it. But seeing them again, for 30 years have the same job. So my dad's a policeman, my mum works for the Welsh government. They've had the same job for 30 years. So asking them about, oh, I might explore this, it just didn't work, and the conversation we have were quite intense, to say it lightly. They were completely against it, and they were completely against it for about 2 years until, I probably came through another end of it. But I say that courage came from, again, it was, looking back, it was quite stark, but spending time with people again. So imagine your parents are, so quick context, grandparents came from India, where they came from beautiful, rich, and luxurious lives, to Britain in the 1950s, working all day, every day for very little reward. Okay, the same for my parents. Seeing them work all day, every day for reward. Growing up in South Wales, in Neath and Swansea, and where it's £2 a pint, and if you earn like 25 grand a year, that's plenty. So growing up in that environment, you always think that if people earned 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 grand a year, never mind tax free, you think that's what you strive for in those working class communities. You think that if people have that, I will be happy. Because if I earned 40 grand a year, I'd be like, this is class. So when you're in that environment, you think that people who earn that amount of money or live that kind of life where they go on these certain types of holidays are happy. You think it. And then when you go to London and you see it's £5 a pint, and you're like, oh wow, this is just nuts. And people are earning this salary and all that kind of stuff. You're like, okay. And then you come to Dubai and it's 16 quid a pint, and you're like, oh my God, this is just nuts now. And you're like, okay, so coming from Neath and coming from parents who've had the same job for 30 years, I'm working now with people who earn 8 to 10 grand a month, tax free. Are they as chuffed as I thought they would be? And that really, and again, it was only one environment that I spent time with, or the people that, I just couldn't understand the logic behind, blowing out on a Thursday night or just spending all your cash on the weekend. I was like, what on earth is going on here? So it was completely,
and if you don't understand,
it was really,
if you don't understand that at 24, you're never going to understand it, are you? The logic of a blow out on a weekend.
You know what I mean? And I was just like, this is just like bonkers. For me, it was seeing people who had everything that I thought. And again, this is incredibly selfish, but my opinion was all of these people have reasons to be happy. They have incredible amounts of money. They have a family. They have security of where they live. They have fantastic clothes. They drive fantastic cars. They eat beautiful food. But you just see the look in the eye, and it's just like, oh, moaning it's Sunday or Monday. And what? Grow up. And this is what I'm thinking. And again, I had loads of incidents where I got in trouble at Deloitte. People used to call me 6 o'clock Sanj, and that's a whole other episode, potential, and I used to get told off lots of things, but it was just like, I was fascinated by how people who I felt had all the resources or tools to live a fulfilled life weren't. And that scared me. And again, I'm not criticizing any of those people in those environments. They made those decisions for themselves and they're doing the best they can. But for me, I was like, I just can't. I ended up getting to a point where I didn't want to get promoted because it meant I'd have to work more. I didn't want to get promoted. I actively, and that's why I worked 18 months, because in those organizations, you're either up or you're out. And it's like, I got to a point where, okay, say I got promoted from analyst to senior analyst or whatever. And it's like, I would have got an extra, 8 or 10 grand? Great. Tax free. That's nuts. But what was I going to do with that? And that's when I started to get, oh, this is just not me. And then when you start thinking like that, it's a very slippery slope or a very snowball effect. So it was important for me to think, okay, what do I want? And people say you learn about what you don't want in certain situations, and for me it was not that. So it was not that. And then what else could I do?
You knew what it wasn't, and you were looking for things to try and put you back into your purpose. We've talked a lot, haven't we, the last half an hour or so, about, I think, 2 really key things: perspective, and those people around you, and learning from people around you and considering their perspectives as well, but not allowing them to necessarily change who you are, but choose the bits that will make you a better person. And then we've also touched upon purpose and how important that's been in your life. What else is really important in terms of positivity, Sanj?
I think the more I explore, the more experiences I have, the more I understand that so again, I've gone through my own journey in terms of positivity and positive psychology. I went through the phase of probably being toxic positive, which is really important within the positivity.
happy and smiley all the time, and everything's
No, that's not. That's been a four-letter word when bad stuff happens. So like, and it's like, I would have gone through experiences where, and again, so the version of me probably 2 years into that journey compared to now 5 years into that journey is completely different. So I think the role of positivity in that respect is how you frame situations is often more important than the situation itself. So unless something like a life-changing moment happens, it could be favorable or unfavorable, most things that happen are for us to decide what they mean to us. And for me, I used to get really frustrated when people were late, like for example, and these kinds of things. And then I was like, right, is it the fact that they're late that's really frustrating me? Maybe. But what do I think if somebody's late? I think, okay, they don't like me. They're not taking me seriously.
yeah.
They're taking me for granted. And where's that come from? Okay, or and then somebody said to me, or I read in a book somewhere something like, okay, well, if that person was just in the traffic jam, would you greet them the same way? Because then I started getting annoyed, and I was like, if I'm meeting somebody for coffee and they're late, I'm not buying them a coffee. I used to become annoying. I was like, they can buy their own coffee. Bloody, I'm going to get my coffee now, and they're late. It's their fault, So I've become like that, or from a social perspective. And I was like, Sanj, just chill out, mate. And then I was like, right, if that person's in a traffic jam or something bad's happened, how would I be different? They're still late, but my interpretation of that event is completely different. Now, again, that can happen for whether it's food, whether it's somebody walking in the street, whether it's the news, whatever it might be. So I think my biggest learning is that how I frame a situation matters almost more than the situation itself. And then what kind of space I'm in that situation also matters. So something that might trigger me, or say something happens, the meaning I give that situation is crucial, but also how receptive I am to that information as well is extremely crucial. So again, whether it's things like whether I've exercised, again, that's why, why do all these people talk about morning exercise and morning routine? Because if that same thing happens and that same, in your context, you meet that grumpy parent or you get that silly email or whatever it might be, that trigger that you get first thing in the morning. If you've done a few things for yourself, your response to that situation is completely different because you're in a completely different space. So I've tried to, and again, this is where my research comes into it now, is like I'm trying to look more into the holistic side of well-being as opposed to just psychology, because psychology is the fundamental and component of that, but also how does our environment influence us? And that's what's really excited me recently. So I think how you frame something is incredibly important.
I think the way that you've packaged that is really interesting. I think that the idea of events around us in life being neutral and our own sort of ego sensitivities, previous experiences, schemas, traumas, they sort of make a decision on whether it's a positive or a negative thing rather than the action itself. It's the older Chinese farmer proverb, isn't it? You've all heard that, haven't you?
Go on.
Go on, shall I tell it?
Go on. Yeah, so go for it. Yeah.
A guy who lives in a small, it is a Chinese story, I think, that's been translated into English. He lives in a small village, and one day his horse runs away, and the people in the village come round to him and say, "Oh, that's too bad, your horse has run away." He said, "Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't." The next day, the horse that ran away returns with 3 other wild horses, and the people in the village say, "Oh, that's amazing, you've got 4 horses now." He said, "Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't." The next day, his youngster jumps on one of the horses. He falls off the horse and breaks his leg. And the people of the village come around and say, "Well, that's too bad. He's broken his leg." Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. The day after that, the conscription officer comes around trying to recruit people for the army. And he can't recruit his son because he's got a broken leg. And the people in the village say, "Well, that's so fortunate." I said, "Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't." But that idea of they're not personal to ourselves. They're not because of necessarily a lot of the time things that we've done. And as human beings, we're so sensitive and we think the world works against us sometimes. And actually that neutrality of it is really important to remember, isn't it? That we put that positive or that negative slant on it.
And like you said earlier, Lewis, and again, that's a beautiful example. And like you said earlier, when things are going for you, it's much easier to say these things. So again, something that fascinates me is how many people say when good things happen, "Oh, that's happened for a reason," or or "That's destiny," or it's just meant to be. And it's like, well, when something goes wrong for you, what about that? What about that then? So it's like how you frame that situation, and that's a great example, is really important, I think, for everybody at different stages of their life. So I completely agree.
And I feel like morning routines are a bit of a hot topic at the minute. The whole sort of get up at 5 a.m. But if we carry on like this, we'll be getting up before we go to bed, won't we? Because we'll need 13 cold showers, 30 minutes of meditation. We need to do some exercise. We need to write, and there's journal. We need to practice gratitude. We need to get some morning sun. We need to get our feet on some grass. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that some of those aren't important. They are. But I think the idea of a morning routine is it comes back to exactly what you've talked about. It's reminding yourself of the neutrality of the things around us and doing something to allow your brain to understand and to process that before you start your day. And for me, it's as simple as that. If you can do something in your head that allows you to make sense and to maybe just process some of the previous day's incidents, maybe process whatever you've been thinking about or worrying about, and give you that idea that this isn't about you. There's a bigger picture. You're a small dot on a planet that's a small dot in a massive universe, and actually have some perspective, and then go and start your day. I think everything can be a little bit more manageable. And for me, I think it fits entirely into what you've just mentioned there, that neutrality of the goings on around you a lot of the time, and your response and your actions being either positive or negative in relation to it.
I think you're spot on. Remember, we talk about language and use of semantics a lot. Being two Yorkshiremen, someone asks you, how are you doing it morning? How are you doing, Lewis? What do you say?
All right, mate, yeah.
Did you listen to that? See that? I'm all right. Or this is the best one from Sheffield. Say, I'm surviving. I'm not doing bad.
I'm not bad is the best.
Yeah, I'm not bad. I'm not bad. I'm just thinking, it was Terry Gormley, weren't it? Terry Gormley, a previous guest who's a sports psychologist. He talked about how just our response like that can trigger our brain to be negative because we just remember the not bad. The bad section of it.
So what you're actually explaining is, well, I'm not bad. Well, actually, you're good then, aren't you?
You're good, yeah.
Rather than focus on the negative side.
So he tells the story of that. Anybody asks him how's he's doing, and he'll say, "I'm amazing," and they look at him like he's an alien coming in from space. But that's the trick, in it, or else that positivity that you've talked about throughout. It's a brain trick. It's tricking your brain and being away from negative. Have you experienced similar with your experiences, Sanj?
Yeah, it's the most important thing in the world for me. How you frame a situation. So again, and I think the art, when you believe in expression and things like that, you believe in art, and I think the art of it, the more experiences you have, is in what context are you like that. So for example, if somebody asks you and you're always saying brilliant, are you actually brilliant or actually amazing? Or in certain people, in certain contexts, are you able to express yourself? So, again, and if you're walking into, let's just use a back home example. But if you walk into a rainy on a Monday morning in winter and it's raining outside, and you're walking in, somebody says, "How are you?" and you're brilliant. You might trigger a few people.
Just annoying people. People just don't want to be around, do they?
So I think in certain environments, how you are is different. Again, on a sunny Friday morning, back home, again, everybody's brilliant. And if you ask people, how are you on a Friday, sunny morning back home, it's like, everyone, it's amazing, isn't it? So like, I think how you frame a situation is really important. How you express a situation to others is really important. And I think being mindful of your audience is something that I'm learning more about, and how, for school students or for athletes or my parents or my partner, or a conversation like this, what version of me will I be? And I think that's something that I've tried to embrace in the last few months through lots of different experiences, some favorable, some unfavorable, and understanding, okay, in the experiences which didn't go so well, what stopped me? And in the conversations that I have that have been brilliant, what enabled that? And ultimately that comes down to confidence and to I think confidence and trusting that you deserve to be where you are, kind of thing. So I think a lot of it comes down to how you frame things. I think that's vital.
We'll wind it down a bit now, Sanj, and we have some quite fun things to finish with. But I just want to start with, are you happy, Sanj?
I get asked this a lot. I would say I'm extremely happy. And I think one thing that interests me is that I used to think happiness was everything. So, I've had a t-shirt with happy on it. I've been called Mr. Happy by people and all these kinds of things. Like, I used to think that happiness, because when you have an absence of happiness, you crave happiness. But I feel blessed over the last few years to experience some of the happiest and most beautiful memories of my life so far. So like happiness is definitely there, but I think the feeling that is overriding that at the moment and more important for me is probably contentment or pride. So at the moment, I'm asking myself when I go to bed, am I proud of myself today? Did
Yeah.
I do my best today? Because I am happy. But I think there's something more than happiness. But again, and obviously happiness means different things to different
Yeah,
people.
it's
But
the context, isn't
I
it?
think
So many
I think
contexts that make that up.
I think to the layperson, I'm extremely happy. But for those people who are interested in happiness, I'm probably proud or I'm content,
Yeah.
or I'm grateful.
Yeah.
So I'm extremely happy, and I feel very fortunate to be in the situation where I am. Um, so yes.
And if Sanj had a billboard on the main road into Swansea, what would it say on it?
Oh, yeah. Also, sorry, just before that, coming back to that, I know it's supposed to be quick fire, and I'm averting the plan. I am extremely happy, but there's things that I would love to be different about my life. You
Okay.
know, my partner lives in a different country for me. You know, I'm still in a long distance relationship. You know, and I have been for 4 years. I don't see my parents as often as I would like. So I am extremely happy in the space I am, but there could be things that make me even happier. But again, having everything is, you know, there was another quote, you can have everything, but you can't have everything at the same time, kind of belief. So there's always things that could be different. But if I was to have a billboard,
You've
what would the
given yourself
billboard
an
say?
extra 25 seconds to let that ruminate.
If I could have a billboard, what would it say? Um, do the best you can.
Do the best you can. Simple.
Yeah, keep it simple.
That link back to that pride idea.
Yeah, because ultimately, again, you know, there was a quote somebody said before about, you know, regardless of who you share your life with, you're the first person you wake up with, you're the last person you go to sleep with. So you know how you feel, and you have a choice to either embrace that or suppress that, or express or suppress. And so I think if you're doing the best you can, and you know, you're honest with yourself, I think that's the minimum we can aim for.
Yeah, brilliant.
And the last one, Sanj, our favourite, 3 people you love to go out for a nice meal with in Dubai, maybe in Burj Khalifa, cheeky meal afterwards, 3 people.
And they're paying for the posh wine. So.
Their favorite. Okay, 3 people, and it's they can be alive or
anybody
alive.
you want, alive, dead, anybody
So
alive.
I'd say if I could have dinner with 3 people, 3 people's tough. If I was to choose 2 other people, I think of a third person. My partner, Tanya. And if I could choose another person, it'd be Virat Kohli, the Indian cricket superstar. I'm absolutely obsessed with his life and how he's um, made things happen. So I'd probably stick with 2. I think that would be an incredible interaction, um, because I've got somebody that I seriously care for, and also somebody who I'm seriously obsessed with in terms of how they've, and obviously you can figure out which one's which,
I would say which
but
one's which.
but in terms of, you know, how somebody's improved themselves over a long period of time, despite the odds maybe being against them, and that's a bit of a, it could be either person in that situation. But I think spending time with people who are confident in themselves and embrace their own journey, not just the highs, which a lot of the highs we've spoken about, but also some of the most challenging moments and what they went through during that period is something which adds a lot of context. And I think the broader conversation of positive psychology as well is like, it's not just the absence of, you know, so well-being is not just the absence of ill-being. There's something more out there. And happiness, again, is not just the absence of unhappiness. So again, positivity is not just the absence of negativity, it's all of those facets combined. And, you know, there's probably some quotes about it, but like, you know, you can't appreciate the sun unless you've seen the rain or that kind of stuff. So I think experiences where you learn about others and their highs and lows are, I guess, comes down to character, but something which excites me. And again, this is why I would say I'm proud, is because these are the kinds of conversations that I would have loved 5, 6 years ago when I was at Deloitte. But now I'm in an environment where I get to have these interactions on the daily basis. So it's fascinating.
And what you just mentioned there comes back to that idea of pride and perspective, doesn't it? The more you get to know people and the better your relationships are with those people around you, the more you understand sometimes just how very fortunate you are. Last question from me, Sanj. It's a big one. You're a cricket fan. So when the English and Welsh cricket board play India, who do you support?
Oh,
India, always.
That was easier
India,
than
yeah, India, always. It's never even a doubt. One, because um, I've always grown up watching India too, because I'm Welsh, and even though it is the England and Wales Cricket Board, everybody in Wales says it's just the England Wales Cricket Board when they play in Cardiff. So it's not. And then you add in the anyone but England kind of t-shirts that people wear 365 days a year around Neath and Swansea. But I'd say in a professional context, I would be different. So as a supporter, I support India always. But working in with the professional context, I understand now I'm less attached to, as a fan, that I can influence the outcome. Whereas within the profession, I would work for the team I'm on. So India always. Bleed blue.
Good on you. Sanj, thanks for coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Wish you the best.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me, boys. I really, really admire you both, and I think what you're doing is special. And I've had the pleasure of spending time with you in person as well. And I know this is a virtual conversation, but time with you in person is even better. So thanks for having me, and I hope this has been useful for you.
Top man, Sanj. Before you go, would you like to share with our listeners a little bit about where they can read more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I've LinkedIn, I'm quite active, and Instagram, I'm a little bit active. And social media is one of those things I'm always thinking about what to post or how to post or when should I post. So it's something that I'm internally processing all the time about what kinds of things do I wait for things to happen and then post it, all these kinds of things. So I'm not as active as I probably should be, but LinkedIn or Instagram is where to find me.
Top man, thanks for your time.
And then I'd say, yeah, cheers.
Take care, pal.